Trump has been in office for a month at this point. He is claiming that they're just going after criminal immigrants. We know that that's not the case based on data that you have compiled. It should have been obvious to people, but they've been very secretive about the people that they're actually rounding up. Now we're starting to get more information. What have you found, and other journalists as well?
Sure. So the data on this point can't lie. Congress requires ICE to publish data every 2 weeks on immigrants in detention. And some of that data includes broad categories of individuals' criminal histories. And, you know, I wrote a couple weeks ago, I said, look, this is what the data is going to look like. We haven't seen it yet, but I promise you there's going to be more detention. But the group that's going to be the most targeted, and we're going to see this in the data, is going to be people without any criminal histories. Yes, there may be some small increase in the number of people with criminal, histories, but most of the growth is going to be in people without. And that's exactly.
Let's put up the table that you publish in your Substack. I guess the third one here, Bradley. This is the raw data that has been published so far in terms of the detained population via ICE and in terms of their criminal history. And then we also have this bar graph. I showed this a few days ago on the show, where you can see that the relative growth of detained immigrants by criminal history with the information that we have so far: 1.2 times growth for convicted criminals, 1.3 times growth for pending criminal charges, but over double that for other immigration violator, which basically means that you cross the border or whatever and you don't have documentation. They're automatically classifying you as a criminal. 3.2 times that in terms of the growth under Trump. Austin, just thought that was helpful visual aid for folks.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's what I really try to do in a lot of the writing and communication I do is, immigration's a complicated system. How do we boil it down to the takeaway points? And especially when those takeaway points, it's crystal clear that the Trump administration is not being honest. Now, I think there's obviously an important conversation to have about just because someone has a criminal charge on their history or a criminal conviction, does that mean that they automatically should be deported? I don't necessarily think so. But the administration is claiming that, and it's interesting, and it's also very dangerous because there was so much misinformation and lies leading up to the election about some kind of crime wave that was happening, which social scientists widely debunked. That
the FBI data shows that there has not been a crime wave. It's now been declines in 2023 and 2024. It was the pandemic, folks. The pandemic.
Exactly. Yeah. And then that narrative got wrapped into this immigrant crime wave, which is even less true than the other one, because immigrants have much lower rates of criminal conviction and charges than citizens. And it's not because they can't find them. It's not because they're undocumented, because they don't commit those crimes. So the simple truth is, there's simply, if the Trump administration is going to do a bunch of immigration enforcement, just the simple reality is there are not enough immigrants with quote unquote serious criminal convictions for those numbers to drive large numbers of deportations. There's some, but it's just not going to happen. And that's what we see with the data.
Especially to meet the quotas that they have essentially given to ICE, which is what, 1,200 a day was what the initial reporting indicated. And that's unrealistic, even if they're doing what we're describing, which is rounding up people with no criminal histories. That's already difficult for them to achieve those quotas. It's ambitious in an extremely scary way, as is setting up a detention camp at a black site that's notorious for abusing prisoners during the War on Terror, the Guantanamo Bay. Now, right-wingers, don't freak out. We know that Bill Clinton has used Guantanamo Bay as a place to transfer immigrants from Haiti and I think from Cuba as well back in the 90s. I would have disagreed with that at the time as well. But it's very different than taking immigrants, Americans, they're here, off U.S. soil and flying them out to this black site where it's specific for specifically designed for immigrants, and they also seemingly don't have the capacity to hold all these people, which means that they're going to be in extremely substandard conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just so important to highlight that the new and really dangerous and unprecedented part here is flying people from the U.S. territory to this off-territory site. Again, it's always been a problem, as you said. Having migrants transferred there, that was always a strategy to prevent migrants from reaching the U.S. soil and reaching humanitarian protection. Let's not forget that these were migrants who were fleeing Haiti, after a political coup that left the country politically devastated, just like happened fairly recently during the Biden administration. The Biden administration has also been, flying migrants, deporting migrants back to Haiti as well. So no administration gets out of culpability and responsibility here. But the idea that you would take people who are being held in the United States or living in the United States and fly them out just to hold them in detention, this is absolutely a clear strategy to deny them basic civil and human rights, to deny them access to attorneys, to treat them like they're subhuman, and to hold them in conditions that will not allow them to, survive. I mean, we're going to see deaths at this camp. There are going to be people who are going to have medical, emergencies, and they're not going to have support, and they're going to, we know this is going to happen. This is predictable. The crucial thing, though, here too, and this goes back to the data point, is they keep misrepresenting this as if these are all dangerous criminals, and they've referred to many of these individuals as part of dangerous gangs. There's all this rhetoric around Tren de Agua, which is Venezuelan gang. And but when you dig into any of these cases, they simply haven't given us any evidence that any of these individuals are anything close to dangerous anyway. Not that we should accept that as a justification, but more than that, I mean, they're using strategies that have been widely debunked to make claims about people, claiming that people have gang affiliations because of, a Michael Jordan tattoo, or because they live in this neighborhood, or, they're from this country. And that's just a really, really dangerous thing to do. These are not necessarily people who are dangerous anyway, even if we were to accept that rhetoric.
And can you expand a little bit more on the reason why it's important for for the Trump administration's aims to get them off U.S. soil from a rights perspective?
Sure. So immigrants have more rights, I think, than people realize. Now, in the immigration system is a civil system. It's not a criminal system. There's actually more protections in the criminal courts than there are in the immigration courts. Nonetheless, if you do have a case pending in the immigration court system, that does give individuals a chance to request humanitarian protection. And even though we were talking about labor earlier, just one big change, I think, since the 90s is really in the last 10 years, we've seen a massive growth in humanitarian migration. So migrants who are coming to the country seeking asylum or other forms of protection. And this has to do with ecological catastrophe, climate change, political and economic instability, all of which, as your last guest, pointed out, the U.S. has some responsibility in the hemisphere and around the globe for these issues. But we've seen a lot of humanitarian migration, and so this is really a strategy not just to dehumanize, but also to make sure that these individuals don't ever really get a legitimate opportunity to put in any kind of humanitarian request. I also want to say that there is a larger political mission behind the Guantanamo Bay phenomenon, which is, if we go back to the war on terror, one of the reasons that Guantanamo Bay was so important to the Bush administration wasn't just about holding people who were potentially threats to the United States. It was about giving the public a kind of vision for the administration doing something that was really tough. And when you put people together and you put them in a place like Guantanamo Bay, it gives people the perception that there really are these dangerous people out there in the world. Because you can't see them, because most people don't meet people who are undocumented, or if they do, they have no idea. So this is kind of a way of giving people something to point at and go, oh, there's where the dangerous people are. And once you give someone that kind of hook in their brain to connect to, it helps them to then accept the rest of the discourse, which is like, if there's dangerous people in Guantanamo Bay, there must be dangerous people also in my community who should be there. So I'm going to support ICE. I'm going to call in ICE. I'm going to call the police, that kind of thing. So
Right.
there's a larger political project here. I think it's really important as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Dave from Regular Estonia, our viewer is always correcting us, says Gitmo is not a black site. It's not hidden or secret. Things are bad enough without inaccurate hyperbole. Yes, thank you, Dave. I was perhaps being a little bit hyperbolic, but it functions similarly as other black sites did in terms of torture. That was the point I was trying to make, but fair enough. So thanks for the correction. And yeah, it's a show of force as a way to further dehumanize, right? And eventually we're going to be getting photos out of this, like we did with the family separation policy. But the problem is that the brakes are off the car here. Lastly, before we let you go, Austin, I wanted to ask you. You wrote a little bit about this in your Substack, because there is one group of folks that the Trump administration is suddenly interested in giving immigration, loosening immigration rules for, and that is white South Africans. So if there's any doubt that Elon Musk is kind of running the show here, or at the very least Trump is completely listening to what he has to say, that should be going out of your mind right now, because I don't really remember him having a passion for Afrikaners in his first administration, although it does fit pretty neatly with his ideology. What is the status of that? And if you could explain why they're doing this.
Sure. It's one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen. When I saw this executive order, I almost fell out of my chair, just with the absurdity of it. It didn't surprise me because nothing from Trump surprises me anymore, but it's absurd. So here's the short version of what's going on. The Trump administration suspended all refugee applications and admissions to the United States for several months. That means people from around the country who have already been vetted and approved. We also know they're already trying to shut down the asylum system and almost have completely, so ending humanitarian migration. But what they said was they were going to approve Afrikaners, white South Africans who were in power during the apartheid years. It's interesting to remember, Emma, that there's probably a lot of people watching today who didn't really get exposed to what a political and politicized issue that was for a lot of people on the left who were very active.
Alive. I wasn't alive then, so yeah. I mean, but
I was very young. So,
yeah.
I mean, this was South African apartheid was one of the dominant organizing injustices of the 20th century. I mean, there were trade unionists in the UK and organizers in India and South America who gravitated to this cause of rampant racial segregation and classification in South Africa, led by a minority of white South Africans known as Afrikaners. Now, with black South Africans getting the right to vote, and in the 1990s, obviously they voted new parties into power. And there's been several years, 2 decades now, of attempts at reconciliation and trying to right the wrongs, which, by the way, we've never done in this country. We've never acknowledged the systemic damage to Black and African Americans in this country because of slavery and Jim Crow. They've tried to do that there. The way that Trump and I think we can say Musk have decided to spin that is, well, white South Africans are now being oppressed because they're trying to right the wrongs of half a century of apartheid.
I think specifically that white South Africans own 70% of the farmland in South Africa, even though they are a distant minority in
and that
the
was supposed to
population.
be addressed as the fall of apartheid.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was specific legislation in 1913 which took land from Black Africans and put them in the hands of white landowners and Afrikaners. So it's absolutely part and parcel of that history. But Trump's executive order opened up the refugee system to one and only one group, the refugee system that he shut down, and that's to Afrikaners.
Yeah, it's pretty explicit. It is pretty explicit. Well, anyway, Austin Kocher, everybody should check out his Substack if you want to stay up to date on all of this immigration news. So much helpful information there, especially because, frankly, on this issue, it might be the most disappointed I've been in with the press over the past month, because they're taking this criminal thing at face value when, as you lay out so clearly, it's mathematically impossible. Even if they were to round up all of the people with criminal histories or even charges, it would not be meeting these quotas in the way that they need to. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, if I could add, I mean, it's just such an important point because, I understand that people have a lot of perspectives on immigration. And there are things that people, even on the left, legitimately disagree about what we should do or, how things work. But this is something that's this is just the fact. We have to agree on what the facts are around this. And I think that's something where I just refuse to back down from the facts when the facts are the facts. And that's just how this whole criminal thing, that's what the data says. I mean, we can't get away from it. So.
Exactly right.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Check out Austin's Substack, and really appreciate you coming on today. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thanks, Emma.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.